Panel members, the questions you submitted, they're going to give us a very brief introduction about their perspective from this region over the last, say, 50 years. They all have different roles to play within that. You've already seen briefly with the slides some of their background. In your copy, make sure you take notes, okay? We have questions.
Yeah, there's some new students, so they need their class code to enter in.
Okay. Clarissa, just take notes in a Word document for now, okay?
Any other questions before we begin?
Yes. But the computer's not acting right. Oh, no, it's working.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Okay. I would like to first thank all of our panel members for joining us today. We know you took time out of your busy schedules, and we're very appreciative of you being here with us. On that note, can we just give them a round of applause? I remember, a few of you have heard this, I remember the first time a teacher told me how history wasn't memorizing dates, facts, battles, names, how it was an exploration, how it was an investigation, and understanding those, but more so an influence of culture, social group, perspective. It really blew my mind, and it started my love with history. And as you know, many of you know, I later studied it in university and then came here to teach it. The current unit for 7th grade in my Cruzadas is just that, an exploration and investigation into historical events in Panama. A large portion of the unit focuses on the former Panama Canal zone, the strip of land that surrounded the Panama Canal, formerly governed by the U.S. The 20th century was a time of change for that area, and students will be studying why and how that change occurred by understanding the perspectives of the people that lived through it. Today is a very special experience. We've invited a special panel of guests who are primary sources to these changes. Students have been provided a short bio on each participant and developed questions. Questions have been selected by Ms. Woganowski and I to help the students deepen their understanding of life in the canal zone. Ms. Woganowski, do you want to come up and introduce the group?
Okay, so.
Our first member is Mr. we're going to go in order of the slides. Mr. Justin Jensen. You've seen his bio. I'm going to give him 1 minute to give us any additional information aside from his bio about his experience and perspective on our canal. So.
Excellent. Good afternoon. I'm actually thrilled to be here. It's a pleasure. As you may know, from my bio, I was here at the very end of the American occupation of the Canal Zone, one of the last remaining military servicemen that was here, and what was called the Canal Zone, or military bases that was here in this area. And it's interesting because my perspective now has changed from what my perspective was then. Okay, I'm back. I live here in Panama and have a different understanding of what happened at that time. But I'm going to try to give you a perspective of what I thought then, and maybe back that up with some of the things I know now as well. One incident I did have then that I didn't understand until now was at one point I was at Cerro Ancon, to the Canal Administration Building. You guys know where that is? There's a big, huge Panamanian flag. But when there was the Canal Zone, there was 2 flags there, at least at the end. Right? There was a U.S. flag and a Panamanian flag. And I was there visiting one afternoon when they were taking the flags down. And the security guard who took them down actually balled up the American flag in a ball and just tossed it to one side. Right? As well as he did the same with the Panamanian flag. But for me, that was very disrespectful. Right? And I got very angry and upset. And later, I found out that there was a lot of different contention with regards to the flying of the flags here in the area. Yeah. And I look forward to your questions.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay. So I am setting a timer and keeping you guys to the 1 minute just so we can get to questions.
Okay, so next we have our Coach Thomas, that you're able to see his bio. Coach, would you like to give us one more minute on your unique perspective?
Good afternoon, boys and girls. Well, I can tell you, boys and girls, that growing up in the Canal Zone area, it was so beautiful. I live in the Canal Zone area in Paraíso and Pedro Miguel. Going to one past Ciudad de Saber, there are two communities that follow, Pedro Miguel and Paraíso. When I grew up there, it was outstanding. I played all the sports, basketball, volleyball, swimming, I practiced judo. Boys and girls, my growing was amazing. But the school that I went to, the teachers spoke English and Spanish. Our classes over there were Spanish, you know. But the community, we spoke English. Because my mom and dad could speak Spanish. Most of the parents over there spoke English. It was a mixture of different nationalities living in that area. So boys and girls, all these equipment that you guys have in the school, take care of it and have fun. Bye.
Thank you, Coach Thomas. Okay, now we have a very special guest who flew in all the way from the States to be with us. And he's also connected to someone very special here. So we have Mr. Gegg, who is Miss Gegg's father.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for inviting me to be on the panel. I was born in Gorgas Hospital, an American mother and a British father, and that automatically made me an American citizen. However, because my father, as defined as the head of the household by the Panama Canal Company, did not work for the Panama Canal, we were not entitled to live in the canal zone. So I ended up living in, as I said, the beautiful city of Coan. If you've ever been there, that's not quite true, but it's still a hometown. And so I attended Canal Zone schools, played Canal Zone sports, but a lot of my friends were Panamanians in Coan. And so I kind of straddled the fence both ways of living in Panama, but having the experience of going to school in the Canal Zone. And I hope to present that perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gegg. All right, and so next we have Mr. Fearon, who is going to share with us his unique perspective on the canal. Thank you, Mr. Fearon.
Good afternoon. I love growing up in the canal zone. I am going to throw a big word out there for you guys. When I talk to other adults, I say that the canal zone was probably the only functioning utopia that ever was in this world. Your parents had a really good job, lived in paradise, and the perspective that I'm going to bring to you all today, I did some of the most interesting things. The boys from Gamboa were the original crocodile hunters, and I've got the pictures that back it up.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fearon. Okay, we have Ms. Batista with us to bring yet again another perspective. So thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Well, as many of you know, I am Panamanian, and I have lived all my life outside the canal zone, and until it was reverted to the Panamanian government. And as Mr. Jensen mentioned before, my perspective has also changed through the years because, you receive information, you start living different experiences that give you some other points of view and change your perspective. And this is my experience regarding the Panama Canal zone.
Okay, thank you all. We know you have so much to share with us. Our students have some questions specifically for each of you, as well as some that are in general that will be offered to the panel. Because again, they saw your bios about a week in advance, so they've had time to study and prepare. So, Ms. Gag, do we want to do a slideshow first?
Yeah, well, we'll just run the pictures in the back.
Okay. All right, so we'll start with student questions. This process will work by, we will be handing you, some of you have submitted your questions. We'll come to you with your question. So Matisse actually has the first question. We'll give him the microphone. We'll give him, okay. So he'll read his question and who it's directed to, and we'll allow them to respond.
Okay, so my question is directed to Mr. Justin Jensen. What is your opinion about the handing the canal back to Panama in 1999?
Very good question. And what is my opinion of giving the canal back in 1999? Well, in 1999, my thoughts were, this is messed up. You know, the thoughts of a lot of my fellow servicemen was, they're kicking us out. We want to stay. We love it here. It's beautiful, and we didn't necessarily understand all the reasons why it was time for us to go. So we were maybe a little upset, a little jealous. We wanted to stay, right? We didn't understand that it was our time to go. We wanted to stay. We wanted to be here. So it's an excellent question. Thank you.
All right, our next question for the panel comes from Simone. Where is Simone? Simone, come on up. Okay. Here you are.
This question is directed to Ms. Batista. How did it feel when the U.S. gave the Panama Canal back to Panama?
Very, very interesting questions. Wow, I'm impressed. Thank you for asking. Well, at that point, I can recall, basically it was like also a question, like, could we do this? Are we able to handle this? I think that as the Panamanian population, many of us asked this, like, at that time, we were like inherited this, receiving this thing with this previous management or administration that was very successful. And at that point, many of us asked, like, are we capable of doing this? And well, the time has speak by itself, right? Thank you.
The next question is by Amaya.
So this is in general for everyone. Was there a clear difference between the rich and the poor? Were there different areas which they lived in? And did that influence or affect the perspectives of people who lived in Panama at that time? Anybody want to take it first?
Well, as you all know, there were two different pay scales in the canal zone. And there was the gold roll and the silver roll. And that set up a little bit of difference between the societies, the different levels of society. From my opinion, I think it was more that the Americans came down here and they were the managers. They weren't the actual labor that did the building of the Panama Canal, but they were the managers. And that's probably why there was a different pay scale. There was a silver roll for people who were brought in mainly from the Caribbean Isles. And they were paid on a much lower scale. They were happy to receive $1 a day for their labor. And this was during the construction of the canal. And then 25 cents of that dollar went to feeding them. And they were happy to come from the British Isles and receive that as a living. And that historical process continued on until the end of the canal zone. There were two different pay scales. So you saw that. And then living in the canal zone, you know, being both Panamanian and American, I can look at it now today and I can see where the Americans didn't do things 100% correct. Because you had a strip of land that divided the country into, and what made it bad for the Americans was that whenever a Panamanian entered the canal zone, all eyes were on them. And you can imagine, this is Panama. This isn't the canal zone. The country was Panama. So when people from Panama would come into the canal zone, they were made to feel like they were foreigners when they just crossed that line. The canal zone police watched them. So there were things that made you see the different levels of stratification between the groups that were here in Panama. Thank you.
Also adding to that, boys and girls, is that a lot of our parents that lives in the Canal Zone area, Paraíso, Pedro Miguel, Santa Cruz, Rainbow City, with a combination of nationality. For instance, my grandparents, my granddad's from British, my other granddad's from Santo Domingo, my grandma from Jamaica, and my other grandma from French. So there are 4 different nationalities my grandparents are. We grew up here in this area. And like Colleen said here, we had different payments, but we were happy for what we were getting. And most of us coming up in my time, we didn't even have to go over to Panama City because we were blessed on this side. We had everything over here. Everything, all the facilities, everything. But then when the time changes, when we went over there, they used to call anyone that lived in the Canal Zone area gringo. Even now they call us gringo. They said that we weren't Panamanian because we live over here. Okay? So they had a different going on at that time.
I had an interesting situation that relates to what was first said about how Panamanians were viewed when they came into the canal zone. Because, as I said, my father was not an American. And if you went grocery shopping in the canal zone, you went to the canal zone commissary, and you were subject to U.S. customs and other U.S. institutions that controlled what you could buy in the canal zone supposedly to keep the competition fair because the prices were lower and not overwhelm the Panamanian economy. But I could go into the commissary, my mother could go into the commissary, my sister could go into the commissary, my father could not. He could not go in there and shop. And that was kind of interesting. And yet, the other thing I actually liked about the situation was you could freely move from the canal zone into Panama and take advantage of the restaurants and entertainment and that type of stuff that was available in Panama. Yet the Panamanians were not allowed really, or not really that welcome to come into the zone and take advantage of any of the facilities there because those were restricted to the canal zone people.
Well, in addition to that, living outside the canal zone and not being aware of the discrimination that was lived inside, even though that was present, it was like we consider lucky people, the ones that were friends with Americans that could get they could enter by the Americans to the canal zone, to the grocery stores and all these places. They were considered lucky, even though they can experience any kind of discrimination once they were inside. Just getting the chance to be inside, crossing that line that was restricted for most of the population, you will consider lucky.
The next question comes from Kaden.
My question is to Mr. Guillaume. How was your life like as a filmmaker?
Well, I'll talk about 2 different perspectives. As a kid growing up in the canal zone, I lived in paradise. They're going to show pictures. I fished from when I was 10 years old. I had the best pets. I had an ocelot as a pet. I had a 12-foot boa constrictor as a pet. We had, my brother went hunting and he shot a ñeque, you know the little animals you see running around here? They noticed that it was pregnant and they got a broken piece of glass and they cut the female open. She was dead. And they found 2 babies and they blew air into its mouth and the babies came to life and they later sent it to a zoo in Chicago. I mean, for a kid growing up in the Canal Zone, it was paradise. That's why I like biology and nature today, because it was such a wonderful place to grow up. As an adult, some of the panelists said that the Americans were lucky, but what's interesting to me is that the government provided everything. We had medical care, commissaries, everything was provided. And when you get older and you get into the older classes, there's a huge political debate going on right now. Is it good to have government provide everything? But I tell you right now, I grew up in a time, in a place where it was wonderful. It was, like I said, it was a utopia. And people still get together and talk about the good old times.
Okay, our next question comes to us from Charlie.
This one's for Steve Day. Sorry, buddy, I've been asking a lot of questions today. Were you discriminated by the Americans who were growing up in the Panama Canal Zone? Were you? Wait, sorry. Yeah. What you said.
Not at all. I had many friends that were Canal Zone friends because we played on sports teams together. And I also shared, tons of friends in Panama. It's really a lucky situation, as I said, straddling both sides of it. One interesting note, though, was, when we were playing basketball at Cristobal High School, they wouldn't let us play Rainbow City because they were afraid we'd get beat. So, but no, my friends, we got along all great. There was none of that really that I felt. And including some of my friends who were Panamanians who were also attending the school that I was going to. There was none of that I realized, that I experienced anything. So no.
The next question comes from Alicia.
This question is for Ms. Batista. What were the advantages and disadvantages of living outside the Canal Zone?
Thank you. Well, advantages, you are living, I don't see it as an advantage or a disadvantage. The only disadvantage that I could think about is more like you were restricted to certain areas in your own country, and that was terrible at that moment because it created like a sense of frustration for many Panamanians that not being able to access a part of your own country wasn't good at all. So I will see it as a disadvantage. But advantages living in your own country, well, many of us can think of all the positive things that include.
The next one comes from Sophia Castro.
So this is to Justin, Denzel, Valex, and Kenny. What was the first year like in the Canal Zone once it was given fully to Panama?
What was the first year like after it opened? 2000.
Well, I was not here, I was away at college, but my parents were still here. My dad was still working for the Panama Canal. And he was upset. He was very upset that the canal was being given back because everything that he worked for his whole working life was being given away. And he was, I don't think until he got a whole lot older that he realized that it was a good thing, that Panama has really done some good things with the Panama Canal and their country has advanced. And I told him, I said, Pop, the Americans ran it like a completely different operation. The Panamanians today run it as a business. You guys run it as a world service. It's two different ways. It's two different ways to look at it. So I think he's calmed down a little bit since then.
On the turnover, boys and girls, I was working at in Babylon swimming pool. I was so lucky. I began working from 14 years of age. I was a lifeguard. And during the recreation program and vacation, I worked as a student aide. And from there, I went to Babylon swimming pool and recreation assistant. I went to university, and the change that I saw, it gave a lot of Panamanians a lot more opportunity, and even the salaries was even changed. So that was one of the positive things that I saw. But in my mind, living in the Canal Zone all these years, it came to me that is the Panamanians going to take care of the canal the right way? It really surprised me. And now seeing it, like our colleague just said, it's a business and it's doing all right.
I was like Kenny, I wasn't here. I had to leave, right? As a military member, I had to leave. However, there were some things that I was aware of because my spouse, anybody know Miss Gloria, she's from here, from Panama, so we still had our contact here. And for some people, like coaches said, it was very good. Others, maybe it wasn't so good at first, because it was a difficult transition, right? When I returned the last 3 years ago, I ran into a taxi driver that used to drive me in and out of Howard Air Force Base. And the taxi driver, was lamenting that it just wasn't as good as it was before, because he had a lot more clients, a lot more people that were driving out in the taxi, needed taxi transportation to areas of the Canal Zone that now no longer needed. So, one perspective is that in general, for many people, they were able to benefit because of the added business that we gave to them. But for certain groups, they certainly suffered after the canal was closed. Or disregard, not closed, turned over.
What I recall from that time is this massive celebration that took place in the administration building area. I can't recall any other event that has gathered such a crowd. It was impressive. I think most of the population living here in the main city of Panama attended that event. Everybody was so happy, celebrating that finally the canal was turned into Panamanian hands, and of course that first year was like all the eyes on the new administration, and it was like I think it was like a very smooth transition. They got prepared for this. They took a couple of years ahead of getting ready for receiving the canal, and that first year I think that went really good.
Okay, our next question comes from Valentina area. Where are you at? Yay. So my question is for Sike, and do you think that there were any difference that you consider between Zonian school
like the Soviet school and the regular Canadian school?
The difference between the schools in and out.
Significant differences. The Canal Zone schools were on U.S. schedules, and which meant that we had summers off to match the summers in the States, essentially June, July, and August. And one of the reasons I was attending those schools, besides the fact that my mother worked there, was to keep me on a track that would end up with me going to a university in the States, which had I been going to schools in Panama, that would not have put me on that track exactly, at least timing-wise. It was also an American quality of education in terms of the things they emphasized, the courses, and that was also something that my parents wanted me to make sure I was exposed to. The Panamanian schools, as far as I understood them, varied significantly in quality of education, just as there are significant differences now. There weren't quite as many private schools back then as there are now. And I know that some of my friends, as I said, were Panamanian, who were also trying to make a track to go to the universities in the United States. That was the reason that they were attending Canal Zone schools just as I was. So yeah, there were some significant differences.
Felicita.
This is for Justin Jensen. How was your life affected and changed when you came back to Panama and married a Panamanian woman?
Wow.
We're all winners.
You know, when you live in one country, it varies from another country. One of the perspectives I can give is that I've also lived in some other countries in the world, not just Panama and not just the United States, but I've lived in Ecuador, I've lived in Korea, and I've spent time in several other countries. Living with a Panamanian woman, or my wife, being from here, first of all, she's very beautiful, we'll say that. Okay? We can't get in trouble for that. And we had to kind of merge our cultures as well, right? She left Panama right as that transition happened. She came to the United States with me, and she had to adjust to a different culture. She ended up having to learn English, learning how to drive, and acclimating herself to a different set of customs and a different set of a different culture. And now that we've returned, right, it was a different type of transition. Now that I live here again, it's under different circumstances. We actually came under very humble circumstances. My first 2.5 years here, I was still finishing up my degree here at Florida State Panama and using a GI Bill to help us survive. And I lived in Araihan. Anybody know where Araihan is? Yeah, it's on the other side of the bridge, right? And it was a new experience for my family, for my kids, because they had to see Panama from a different perspective. And little by little, we've come back to, I want to say, a level that's similar to what we lived within the United States. But it's been a lot of hard work. And you may find yourselves, as you get older, whether you live here in the Canal Zone, in Panama, or anywhere else in the world, that you will have times where you start from scratch and you have to build upon it, and you'll see it, and you'll maybe go through that more than one time in your life.
Okay, next up, Jenny Kruger. Thank you, Jenny.
So this is general. Were there rules about certain stores that you guys could go to, and how strict were they?
Rules about the stores or shopping within the Canal Zone.
Well, I have no stories regarding stores, but I can remember that getting through because there were certain areas, for example, here was the bridge between Clayton and Albrook. Panamanians can transit around like the fence of this Panama Canal zone area, and once you go through that road, you weren't supposed to throw any kind of trash or nothing out of the window, because there was like this rule or story, urban legend, something like that, that if you throw something out of the window, immediately you got out like a patrol behind you for, littering.
I think I mentioned earlier that the rules were quite strict. Everything in the canal zone was controlled by Panama Canal Customs. And I remember specifically, as I said, my father was not an American citizen, could not even enter the store. You had to have a commissary card, an ID card to get in and be able to purchase anything. And one of the things that I remember most significantly was at Christmas time or Thanksgiving, when my parents would want to buy food for the people that worked for us and go on and took care of the family and stuff, and we'd try and buy turkeys. We were very carefully monitored as to how much food was being bought and where it was going, because they did not want, Panamanians were not allowed to come into the commissary and shop. The other side of that was, it was in some ways, the Panamanians who just didn't pay attention to it. It's great. And one of my best friends was a turtle salesman and a meat salesman at the market. And we used to go riding around on Sundays with another friend of mine. And we were headed up to this place called the Tarpon Club at Gatun, which was an American club. If you're going to get in here, you better have a commissary card or some equivalent thing. And he decided that we were going out there. And I was not happy. I was in the car. And I'm like, you guys get in a lot of trouble. So I'm like, oh man, Lucho, I don't want you to get in any trouble. Well, we get there, it turns out he was delivering all the meat to the place. He basically owned the place, and he could have gone in there and bought it. And it was the funniest thing. I remember thinking, now here's a guy who just doesn't care. And he was getting away with it. And it was great. So, there were two sides to that.
At Pete Miguel and Paraíso Santa Cruz, Rainbow City, our parents that works with that had worked with Canal Zone, we had special privilege. We had our commissary cards that our parents and our children could go in and purchase anything we need. We didn't have to go to Panama City to purchase nothing. No. So we are very special, boys and girls. And I miss it. It was so great. Not to forget about it.
My family story is a little bit different. On my dad's side, they were more Panamanian than they were American. On my mother's side, they were all American. And even though I got my Panamanian citizenship from my mother because she was born in Villa España in San Francisco, I was born in Villa España in San Francisco. So I have a mixed story also, same as Mr. Gay. And what was interesting about that is that everybody, especially around the holidays, like they were saying, they monitored how many turkeys your family bought, because if you gave one away as a gift, you could get in trouble. And they monitored that kind of stuff. The government owned the ships that brought the food down to Panama, to the canal zone. So they wanted to keep track of it. And it was one of those things that, it was one of the small things, like coming across the border and all eyes were on you. The story that you tell about, whether it was urban legend or if you throw a piece of trash out, a cop would be on you in a second. It's that little thing that was small, but it really was an irritant to the Panamanian people because they thought the country was Panama and the Americans thought the canal zone was its own little country. And so those are the little things that kind of rub people the wrong way that you wouldn't think would cause a lot of trouble. But they did. They did.
Just one thing. one thing that we keep talking about Panama and the Canal Zone, and one thing I think that we're not looking at is there was a third community here that you were part of, which is the military and the military bases. And I, as an American, as a Canal Zone commissary, however, I could not go shop on the base exchanges. And the same for the Panamanians, just like they couldn't go into the commissaries. I could not go on to the military posts and buy anything or do anything out there. And so that was yet a third set of rules and regulations that were in place, and it's just a third perspective on things as well.
I don't have much to add other than our rules were similar to the other rules in place for military. And yes, we would pull people over for throwing trash. I was a military police.
I've never seen it close to that.
Sure.
The products, I mean, people that I've heard, the products that were sold in certain places were different. I mean, maybe Jenny Sell can talk about this with the American Friend. People often say they hoped their American friend would get them a certain product because they were American products versus.
True, I think so.
It was like harder to get to military areas, like the ones where the military used to live. Those were more like restrictions. It was harder to get there. There were other communities.
The military, there's certain rules with like beef that is sold to the military. For example, beef that's sold to the U.S. military is done at an extremely low price because it's to supply the military, right? So the things like ham or turkey during Christmas time. However, the commissaries had a limited, as well, they have a limited access to those types of things. So there were definitely rules and there's definitely reasons why they had some of those rules. However, if you were on the outside looking in, it may be difficult to understand why they get privilege and why can't we have the same.
Okay, our next question comes from Ignacio.
This question is for Mr. Huron. How did Gamboa change over time, and what is your perspective on wildlife management?
That's a really good question, Ignacio. I can say that I remember the Panamanian beaches when there was no trash on the beach. That's how long ago I used to live here in Panama. And the world has changed. You see, what's interesting to me though, you see more Niente, Gata Solo. I saw Jaguar when I was working out in Gamboa, driving back to Holbrook at 10 o'clock at night. I saw Jaguar across the road on the Gamboa Road. So it's more wild now than it was then. And why is that? I think because they outlawed hunting. Hunting is no longer permitted in Panama. And so you see a lot more wildlife. I love living here and seeing in the morning, even here in Balboa, you see the parrots flying over my pairs. I mean, to me, that's valuable stuff. You see toucans and things like that. I think Panama needs to invest in ecotourism. I think Costa Rica does it very well, and I think Panama should do the same thing. But we have to do things. We have to pass laws. You throw trash out of the car, you get a fine. Panama needs those things today. I'm sorry to say, but we need to do small things like that. In the States, they charge you. You get fined $500 you throw trash out of your car in the States. So Panama can maybe start out with $1. You know, like,
Can I add something to that? I think that what you mentioned about like seeing more animals now, that I get it correctly, is that my perspective on that is like animals are trying to get food. I mean, the lot of urban development has, around the area, and many of these animals' habitats have been invaded by people. They are building, these plazas that's like after Cardenas. They destroy so many, green areas to build that, and these animals are coming out of what they used to have to look for food. And one of the things that we kept from when we received our house, because we had to participate in an action to get our house in Albrook. It was really hard to get to purchase that house at that time. And one of the things we kept, and we still have it, is a trash can. Because they are huge and heavy metal trash cans, especially designed for these animals, not like turning them upside down. And the gatosolos, they used to take out the garbage and eat from there. And these were huge trash cans specialized for keeping these animals away. And we can see they come around the neighborhood in these huge groups looking for food, and they are desperate. So I think that's why we are seeing more animals around.
The next question comes from Sofia Gonzalez.
My question is for Steve Gay, and what was your experience like? What was your experience studying with Estonians?
Fabulous most of the time. We were all friends. There were some interesting situations in the sense that there were some very dedicated Zonians who I'm sure were horrified when they found out the canal was going to be turned over. And so there was that extreme element maybe. But for the most part, the people that I knew and spent time with were not happy, but certainly understood what was going on, or at least trying to understand what was going on. It was a very confusing situation, a very difficult time. I know, the other side of that, I know some people, because we lived in Golan, who would not come to a party at my parents' house when they were invited, because they were just too afraid to come driving into Golan, Panama. There was no need for that, but that's just the way they felt about it. But I personally, I had friends in the zone all over, just like I had friends in Panama. It was wonderful.
The next question comes from Olivia. Oh, that's Olivia. Sorry, Bryson. Sorry. Not this position.
My question is in general, and what are some major developments in the zone which you thought were good or bad?
From then until now? Yeah. So some of the changes, good and bad, in this area.
I still think that the Canal Authority, ACP, is probably a very professional institution. I mean, they have a very specialized job moving ships through the Panama Canal. And you'll even talk to the Panamanian people. If you're a part of ACP, you're a part of the clique, that you have a very good paying job. But as far as the country of Panama, I'm very impressed by the city of Panama. You fly into Panama City and it rivals Manhattan, New York City. I mean, all the high rises, they may not be as tall, but we have just as many high rises. Panama is one of the few countries in the world since 2008 that has expanded between 7 and 15% a year. You should be very proud that your country is the only country that has grown in that time. Those are things that I've seen.
I will say that one of the major changes is like in the economy, we are actually receiving amounts of money that before we didn't get because the participation of the government, I'm not sure whether it was like minimum in terms of profit, but now we get all the profit from the Panama Canal functioning. They are reverting to Panamanian economy, and that's one of the major things. But as I mentioned before, the urban development around the area has destroyed most of the, and even though the ACP is taking care of the Cuenca hydrográfica of the Panama Canal, which is it's the most important part of it. Without that, it won't work. And I think they should get more strict about controlling the urban development around this area.
I'm really impressed when I look at places like Fort Clayton here that have been taken over and schools have been turned into, or buildings have been turned into schools and people are buying houses on the old Army bases. But I've also seen, being on the Kawan side, that there's still destitute poverty in places that have just not seen economic development. And that includes some of the old Army bases where if you look at this and it's beautiful, if you went to Fort Davis or Fort Goulet, it looks like a bomb went off, and you would say there are places in Howard that look the same. I know that there's a move now afoot by the Panamanian government to pump money into the city of Kawan, but it's a tough thing to do. To try and spread the wealth out. It does seem to be concentrated in Panama City. Panama City is spectacular in its development, but I think the development needs to be expanded into other areas so more people benefit from it.
I think what I see good is definitely the way that they use those funds for their economy. The economy is definitely turned for the better, but I don't know, just like Mr. Geddes, I don't know if that money is being distributed well. I think that sometimes when you have an increase in economy, you also have an increase in corruption. And I think as one of the negative things about the changes right now is I've seen an increase in corruption in Panama that I didn't see previously. I also see some good efforts to change that by the current government, by some of the groups of police that are here that I'm in contact with. So I guess with every positive there's a negative, but there's also something for you as a younger generation to look at as you proceed to try to change things. Some of you will be in positions of government or in business and in positions where you can affect change, right? And so these issues are things that you can look at, and if you think about it now, and as you're young, you can think of some things that we, being a little bit older, haven't been able to think of. Using your technology, using the modern ideas that you have, looking at the ways, like we've all mentioned here at least one point or another, problems with the economy or problems with the environment. So how do we develop and build new buildings and things? How do we use new technologies and still save the nyeke and the little animals we have? So I think you have some work to do.
I would add to that the Latin American community, Paraíso Peruvian, a great change that I've seen is that when the America was in charge, keeping the facilities well maintained, keeping the area well clean compared to Panama. Now, if you don't keep your place clean, the grass is growing up, and I don't think right now they're not doing the maintenance they should. That's one of the things that we really have to look into in Paraíso, Pedro, Gamboa, and San Luis. Those homes have been purchased by the families that are living there, and they keep the area clean, but other areas, like the baseball facility, Pedro, they haven't maintained it. If the community don't do it, the government have not done it. So really, that's a big change to be seen.
We're going to move to the last student question. And after the student question, we're actually going to open up the questions to those. There's been a few adults that have attended, teachers and staff members, and we'd like to give you an opportunity if you have a question to ask it. Don't feel you have to, of course, but we'd love to hear some of the things you've maybe learned or questions you have from what you have learned from this. But our last student question comes from Ria.
I have a general question, and it's if you could change something during the time, what would it be? Yeah, at that time.
Someone wants to-
I think the Americans should have made Panamanians feel like that this was their country too. When you read about the history books and how the canal was built when the Americans first came here, two things that they did. They put up a fence and they ran the American flag on the pole. And that attitude continued from day one until the end. And I think they should have done a better job of making the Panamanians feel like this was their country also, instead of Panama and the Canal Zone. So that's my short opinion.
If I could change something then or back in the, and I guess it would have been prior even to my being here in the Canal Zone, if I had powers to try and travel and go back, I would eliminate the gold and silver pay rules. I think that was very unjust. If you look into the history a little bit more of the Canal Zone, there was segregation and there was discrimination and downright racism. Point blank. If you were Afro-Panamanian or Antillean and you lived here in the Canal Zone, your life was different than an American citizen living here, a U.S. citizen living in the Canal Zone. And oftentimes you get mistreated from both sides. If you were Antillean, you were mistreated both within the zone because you weren't of the gold roll, so you didn't get the employment benefits, you didn't get the other benefits and the pay that went along with being in the zone. But then if you were forced to leave the zone because you no longer had a job in the zone, you were also ostracized by the Panamanians. You're not Panamanian, you're a Zonian. And I think that hurt the country and it's still hurting the country today.
I guess I think everybody's echoing the same thing here, that there should be more, I think, integration of Panama into the actual running of the canal and operating of the canal, and realizing the benefits of the canal being here. And I would certainly go along with that, but I think that should have happened a long time ago. So I agree with everybody.
Thank you. I will say, yeah, I share your ideas, and also I think that opening that restriction around the area will help Panamanian people to understand or to learn from that experience at that moment, understanding a different management system, learning from other educational models, and that will help a lot for the future generations. And today we will have a different perspective or point of view on that. If we have the chance to see that with our own eyes, because many of us just fantasize about that utopia that Mr. Piran talked about at the beginning. It's just like a dream that we didn't live.
Last but not least, I would say that even coming up in the Zonian era, it should have been equal rights for everyone, equal pay for everyone, equal facility for everyone. Even having an American here all these years, the Panamanians should have been learning English, combined bilingual. Now they're doing it in the school, but this have done, should have done a long time before. We have been a lot better. Panamanians and American and different nationalities would have been a lot better now.
So I'd like to open it up to any teachers or adults in the room that may have a question or comment. I'm looking. Yeah, Mr. Wallace. Can I say that you have some background and connection to this? Do you want to tell a little bit about that before you ask your question?
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon to everybody on the panel. Yes, my name is Javier Wallace. How the kids know me? Yes, my father is actually born here in Panama. He is born and raised in Rainbow City, in the Canal Zone on the Atlantic side of Colombia. Both of my grandparents are from Panama. They were not born in the Canal Zone, but my grandfather contracted a job in the Canal Zone. And hence he moved into the Panama Canal Zone, and all the kids were there. They migrated to the States, and some still live here in Panama. So I do have a strong connection to the Panama Canal Zone. It's always been something that I've heard about my entire life, through friends and family that have been here and that live in the States and come and visit. But my question is for the people on the panel who are born either in the Latin American community of the Panama Canal Zone or born outside of the Panama Canal Zone. I heard that have Panamanian citizenship. My question is, how was it for you, your experiences as a Panamanian born in the Canal Zone of the Latin American community or a Panamanian born outside of the Canal Zone? How were you able to integrate or to come into Panamanian society once the United States left the Panama Canal, and how did you integrate into Panamanian society as a Panamanian born in the Latin American community inside the zone, or a Panamanian born outside the zone with connections to the Panama Canal? That's my question for the panel, for those that apply.
Okay, Mr. Fearon, Valencia.
Like I said, my family's kind of divided into two different groups. On my dad's side, they spoke Spanish, and they were more Panamanian than they were American, even though they looked American. They integrated more. My grandfather, he told a story once. He got stopped by a Panamanian police, military police, and the guy started treating him like he was an American. And my grandfather turned around and started chewing him out in Spanish, saying, "I'm more Panamanian than you are." And the guy was like, "Whoa, okay." But it was I think, then on my mother's side, they didn't even try to speak Spanish. And that you live here all your life in a country and you don't try to speak the language. I mean, that just goes to show within one simple family, you have two different attitudes. And I think you have to be accepting of the culture that you live. You live in Panama, you need to adapt and do some of the things that Panamanians do.
For me, another part is when I graduated out of high school, now the teacher spoke Spanish. Now I understand, I could speak Spanish, but when I was integrated in the University of Panama, I could answer in English. I had to think in Spanish before I could speak. So I did have a problem over there going to the University of Panama. But boys and girls, whenever you want to do something, you put your mind and soul and heart into it, and you can make it. Okay?
That's you. Do you agree? I didn't know. I think no. For you. Yeah. It's like if you were born, like you're Panamanian, even though you were born in the Corgus and stuff. How did you integrate?
Okay. Well, as I said, I was very lucky that I feel I was very lucky that I lived in the Panama side, and also fortunate enough to experience the benefits of an American education and so on and so forth. But the main thing, I think, getting back to the language thing was, my parents told me I spoke Spanish before I spoke English. That could very well be, if you wanted to go out and play ball with the boys, you better start learning how to speak Spanish if you wanted to get picked, And we were an entirely American family at home. We spoke English at home. We went to the States, but once I stepped outside the walls of my house, everybody in my neighborhood spoke Spanish, and I was really the only American kid in that neighborhood that would be going around. And I just feel that I was really fortunate to experience that Panamanian side of the culture.
That's it. Yeah. Any?
Are there any other adults that have questions? Anybody? Okay, what we like to do is first off, like to make sure that we thank them very, very much for coming and taking the time to educate you